the slideshow and get us started. So welcome to the Leadership Masterclass on how managers can save 10 or more hours a week and yet have an even higher performing team. So we'll go into a variety of things around how this exactly works. Well, what we'll do first is just a little bit of an introduction about me. I like my sport. I like keeping fit. I'm a Collingwood member for a long time now in the AFL. So I was happy a few years ago when we won the premiership, and there's a photo of me there with my partner and my son. There's also a photo of me doing one of the fun runs that I've tried to do at different times. And then the big photo in the middle is an example of one of the leadership programs that I have facilitated over many years. It's me over on the far left. And I put that in there partly also to share my purpose, because over the years, my purpose has come to be helping leaders be the best that they can be, and therefore creating a much more positive impact throughout the community, the groups that they're involved in, or their organizations. Because when you stop to think about it, anytime you have had a really good leader in any group in your life, what was that experience like for you? Pretty much everyone tells me it was a really good experience. On the other hand, if you've had an average or poor manager, people tell me that creates a stressful environment. So I'm hoping to create a much more positive and happy environment by creating more effective leaders. So a bit of background about my story. I first came to be a manager in my late 20s, didn't have any great training, and made lots of mistakes. Although at the time I thought I was doing pretty well and I was going on with trial and error, but I didn't realize that I could have been a lot better than I was. And I put in a lot of hours, and that was part of the trial and error learning process and part of what I thought was required to be a very good manager. But eventually I got some really good leadership training and then some follow-up. I invested in some ongoing coaching, and that led me to improve more in less than 1 year than I had in the previous 7 years of trying to do it by myself and trial and error. And then others noticed a change in me, and they started asking me about helping them and coaching them along the way. So I had nearly 20 years in corporate and different management positions. So then I stepped out to become a full-time leadership coach and facilitator about 15 years ago. And I've run leadership training programs like that photo you saw for over 1,500 people now, and coached individually over 300 managers. And I've helped those managers and leaders to be able to work less hours and yet have a more balanced life, but even create a better performance. So they get promoted and earn more, they hit more targets and have a highly motivated team. And really importantly too, they increase their job satisfaction. Okay. So that's what we're looking for to create. I'm looking to create for as many managers and leaders as I possibly can. Now, on the other hand, here's what we're seeing with the research. Okay. We're finding that overall engagement with employees is still low, and roughly 2/3 of employees are disengaged or actively disengaged. And managers, it's even higher. Okay. It's between 70 and 80% because of what's happening and the workload that they've got. And one of the number one reasons is that managers are looking at or facing or worried about burnout. In fact, it's got to the stage now with one of the latest Gallup and also Culture Amp surveys that people are just choosing not to take opportunities to become managers because they're worried about these things. Over 70% of managers are experiencing ongoing work stress and overwhelm. And over 80% of managers say that their organization could have done a lot more to set them up for success. So they're not given exactly what they need to be a success in a management role. So let's take a moment to check in and see how you're going, and ask you some key questions, and I'll get some responses back from you. So firstly, something to think about. How do you think you're performing right now, giving yourself a rating out of 10? Where 10 out of 10 is you at your best. It's not perfect. No, it's not something unattainable. You can get 10 out of 10. It's like, an athlete doing their personal best. That's something they can achieve. That's 10 out of 10. And 1 out of 10 is something that's quite low. So have a think about, make a note, maybe share in the chat. How are you going with that right now? Where are you at?
Just going to close my office door so I can chat, Michael, just a second.
Sure.
I'm just in between roles at the moment there, Michael. So me, I'm a little bit different, I suppose, in some ways of looking at it. So in my last role, I'd put myself around about a 6 or a 7.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for being honest and sharing that. And as you'll see in a moment with some of the results of some of the research, informal research that I've done, that's quite a lot of people are giving that sort of similar response.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be around the 6 as well. So if I think about my salesperson, I'm probably more like at an 8 or a 9. But if I think about a consultant that I'm working with, I'm struggling to get the best out of that person. So I feel like I'm probably more like a 4 there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And another great example of how just in different contexts and different situations can be slightly different. And of course, what we're aiming for, and we'll see a little bit more in a moment, is we want to be as high as possible, as consistently as possible, don't we? All right. So let's have a look at a couple of other things here as to what connects to making this work. So one of the things to think about is how happy are you with the hours that you work per week? Okay, where 10 out of 10 is just like it's ideal. I've got balance, I've got boundaries, I've got flexibility, I've got what I want. 1 out of 10 is like I'm reactive and at the mercy of everything else going on, and I'm working longer hours than I want to. And Rodney, you might need to think about back to past roles, given your current.
Yeah. Look, each role that I've done have all been quite uniquely different as well. Some require more hours than others. My last role was pretty sort of balanced, but there were long days, but it was only a 9-day fortnight I was working. So, hey, you trade-offs with things as well. But I find the higher you go up the ladder, so to speak, your time does become precious.
Yes.
More from a work-life balance point of view, because there ends up being less work-life balance the higher you go up the so-called chain, or whatever you like to call it. So it's how you put boundaries around that, and how you work with your people to bridge those bits and pieces well. So there's a fair share of load taken in all parts of the business.
Yes, exactly. And that's a question that comes up so often for me, for people who want to progress their career. It's kind of like, I'm working quite long hours now. If I get a promotion, what hours do I need to work? And there's different ways around that, because one of the things that is absolutely certain from what I've seen is that you don't need to work significantly more hours, sometimes no more hours, in order to be highly effective in a more senior role. Yeah. Anything else others want to share?
Yeah, so probably in terms of hours, I'm not unhappy with the hours that I work. I run my own business, so my hours are a bit flexible and probably in that 45 to 50 plus type range. I just think my productivity for the time that I'm spending probably isn't as high as I'd like it to be. That's probably the key for me. So it's less about burning the hours and more about getting value from the time.
Value from time. Okay, great. Having that higher effectiveness and impact in the time that you're working. Great.
Right.
We'll talk some more about that too as we go forward. And then the other thing to think about here that helps you from a leadership point of view is, do you have all of the tools and resources that you need to know that you can be at your best? Okay. So all of the aspects of knowing what to do in different leadership situations, having tools, having models, strategies that you can go and get that, and that's something that is proven and works in each situation. And this is something that many people haven't really even stopped to think about when I do these master classes. So some don't even know exactly what it looks like to have a full toolkit, if you like. So anything you'd like to share on that one?
I think it's always a challenge because every role that you do at different times is going to throw up different situations that you need to deal with. You can go back on prior experiences and that to help guide you, but there's always going to be something that you're going to need a bit more in your tool belt to actually assist and help with solving the next problem or issue that's propped up.
Yes, absolutely. There's a whole lot of different situations. So it's about the extent to which you feel comfortable that you've got enough that allows you to be at your best, rather than feeling like you don't have enough resources or knowledge or capability in a certain area. Yeah. And so that's something I encourage people to explore and ask themselves about and really reflect on. One of the things that I found looking at these sort of questions going back years is that I thought I was doing okay kind of with my approach, but when I realized that there were other approaches and specific models and proven processes, that's when I could be a lot more effective.
Think probably for me it's about, like, there's a range of different tools and resources, and I'm quite good at collecting those. It's probably more about consistent application of those different tools and resources, and internal things like systems, dashboards, KPIs, OKRs, rocks, etc. That is probably, I tend to grab the shiny thing and the thing that's front of mind, as opposed to being consistent and being consistent.
Yes, and almost all managers have a challenge with that, and there's different personality types, some that like the shiny things more than others. And it's a very common thing that I hear, is that there's actually lots of resources out there. It's not like there's a lack of resources available, and lots of people do great things with books and these kind of masterclasses. The biggest challenge is consistently using them and implementing them. Yeah, absolutely. So we hear that consistently.
I have a similar color-coded bookshelf in our office, like you have behind you, of a range of different management and self-help type books. So yeah, I'm pretty good at collecting them.
Very good. As I said, it's a very common situation. All right, so let's keep moving forward. So what I've found in asking this question of many people is that over 80% of managers rate themselves somewhere between 3 and 6. So you're both on that sort of space where it's a bit higher, but on that edge. And they want to be 10 out of 10, ideally, or at least 8 to 10 out of 10 consistently. But most people don't know exactly what they need to do to be consistently 8 out of 10, what they need to do to get there, right? And so that's what we're going to help you with today. Now, what it looks like in the situations is those that are down around the 3, they're really feeling quite overloaded and low on confidence. And there's a concern that they're worried about burnout. And from an organizational point of view, it could be that they either burn out or that they leave, either which is quite a drain on the organization. Those that are a bit higher, and maybe you can relate to some of these sorts of things, there's some really good stuff that happens. So there's confidence can be up, but it can go down because of the different situations, different contexts. So what's what I call a confidence roller coaster. And a little bit what we've just been talking about. You have access to information, or you do courses, or you read books, etc., and that the habits don't stick, or they don't even get implemented in the first place. And so people still find they're not getting strategic time to really focus on being highly effective as a leader. And so there's still quite a high level of stress. And of course, what we're looking for, what ideal 8 out of 10 looks like, is consistently high confidence. You're really engaging with others, and the team feels engaged and empowered. Yet you're still able to hold people accountable for what they need to be able to do. And you're adding strategic value. You're able to step back and reflect and see a bigger picture and be proactive. So have a think about what it would be like to consistently be feeling like that and doing those things. So let's have a look at the 3 key things that we can look at here as to how managers can save 10 hours a week. So the first thing is about meetings, all right, and sharpening up in that area. The second is about email. The third is about capacity and looking at your planning system. And then the fourth, the one that really brings in the biggest difference in hours, but also in the performance of your team. So the overall team and then connecting to the organization is how you're being effective as a leader, which connects back to being in that 8 to 10 out of 10 more consistently and more often. So let's jump into each of these, and please feel free to ask any questions as we're going along to get some more specifics. All right. So firstly, let's have a look at meetings. So the first thing that you can do, which can usually save most people just as a starting point, 1 to 2 hours a week, is simply to really get clearer on not going to some meetings. Okay. And what I get told by most people these days is that there's so many meetings that they get invited to. Often they just go automatically into the calendar. And so it's just first step is about being more aware. You don't have to go to every single one of those meetings. And it's not just about only when they conflict that you make a decision. It should be consistently making a decision about what meetings are effective for you. And also to take this to a deeper level, which takes quite a bit of work for most people, it's about how to be appropriately assertive. So actually being able to decline meetings, right? Rather than just thinking it's easier not to get in that situation where it might be awkward because I'm declining it. And the other one is fear of missing out. So these things take a deeper work to think through. Okay, so you can think about how would you go about that first point? Even if it was 1 to 2 meetings a week, that's likely to save you 1 to 2 hours. Okay. Then there's a whole other area about how you run the meetings, starting and ending them on time, considering the duration, and having an impact on the meetings themselves, whether you're the chair or not, so that they can run more effectively. Okay. And that can save you some further time as well, rather than meetings running over, etc. So the next thing we can look at is another aspect of improving meetings is having a good structure around purpose, agenda, roles, and action items. Now, you can have a big impact on this when you're running them. If others are running them, then it becomes some real leadership skills with influence and empowerment and engagement as to how you get to have much clearer purpose, agenda, roles, etc. within a meeting, and the action items being clear. So we're not using the next meeting next week or next month to catch up on what happened in the last meeting. And another important one to think about is empowering others so they can attend some of these meetings for you. And this is as much about helping them grow and giving them opportunity as it is about impacting your time. So that's another one to think about. It's going to be set up in the right way. So here, my clients have saved usually easily 1 hour a week, but often 3, 4, 5 hours a week, just getting these things right. Some of them can be done quite quickly. Some take some time to put in place. Any questions or thoughts around that you'd like to ask or share?
I find the
sorry, Rodney,
meetings.
you go.
Oh, sorry. I find the meetings one is the most important one out of all of it, having a clear purpose and agenda, but also people understanding that the purpose of the meeting at the end of it is we go away and solve our problems, come back next meeting is reporting about it, not trying to solve the problem at the next meeting. And that's what I think people get a wee bit confused with, of the actual true value or the purpose of a meeting, of what it's there for to do. It's not to solve problems, it's to get them out of the way and done and finished with completely.
Agreed. Absolutely. And it's a good example of it takes a bit more than just saying, oh, let's get a good purpose and agenda for this meeting. It's actually running it in a way that comes through and achieves the outcomes exactly like you're talking about, Rodney.
Yeah. And it's the accountable action items at the end of it and holding people to account in a nice way, not in a punitive way. And then people then get engaged with the purpose of the meeting as well.
Exactly. So, and it sounds simple. And when everybody's really happy in a meeting, it does work quite smoothly. And in most cases, with differences of opinion and different personalities and different levels, it's actually quite difficult to achieve. And so that's something that you need to keep working on to develop that impact and those skills. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
I was going to dive in with a little tool that I picked up from someone at BHP circa 2010. She used context and purpose as headings in meeting invites. So context is the what are we doing and why does it matter to you? And then purpose is what do we want to get out of the time that we're spending? And then you might have an agenda underneath that of the key talking points. So, we're working on this project, we need to engage with broader stakeholder groups. Our purpose today is to work through this specific area with you, and here are the talking points in the agenda. So, that's just a good little setup. And I borrowed that in late 2010 and I'm still using it now.
Brilliant. Yeah. And how much nicer is it when you've got that, or if you're invited to the meeting, you receive that and you know exactly what's going on. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think like sharing that with, we work in projects, so making that a standard within projects that we always have a context, a purpose, and an agenda. Otherwise, you're not applying the way that we operate within this project or within this organization. I think that can apply to teams and just making it part of the standard culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. And so that's a good example, is that if there becomes a meeting invitation and those things aren't there, then part of this is about how do you handle that? And so there becomes a discussion. There becomes quite likely at some points that you decline that meeting, and so that you can make sure that it gets set up the way that you want it to be set up in your organization, your team. Yep.
And something I saw in another client, and this is just a little time-saving thing because that's what we're here to do, is lots of Teams meetings get booked, and then there's always the obligatory check of, are you okay if we record this meeting? Well, we had a client that just made it a standard. When you send out the meeting invite, it's going to record by default, and everyone just knows that. And bang, you've automatically saved 30 seconds, a minute at the start of just checking with people if they're okay with something which has become a business standard.
Yep. Yeah. Another good example. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So good examples there and good points around meetings. Now let's look at emails. So the key point here that I encourage people to change is to stop by default or unconsciously prioritizing what you do by looking at your email. Okay. And so many people do this without realizing, by checking their email consistently. And essentially what happens is that by looking at your email so often, what you're doing is responding to what's happening in the email rather than getting out of the email or thinking at things from a different perspective. Okay. So it's easy for email to become the default to list and prioritization. For example, you come out of a meeting, you come back to your desk. What do? Most people, 99% of the time, 99.9 maybe, check their email, and then the next thing they do is based on what they see in their email. And so my question to managers and leaders is that really what's most effective? And if you're doing that consistently throughout the day, then it's not going to be what's effective. You will be busy, you will be active, you'll get a bunch of things done. But is it having the highest level of impact? It's highly unlikely. Okay. So what I suggest is changing your mindset and looking at email by processing it in blocks of time. So rather than checking it consistently all the time or every time a notification comes up, is you look at breaking it down into blocks where you check your email, whatever works for you, 3 times a day, 4 times a day. And then when you check it, it's about processing it through. Okay. One of the things we can do is create some rules. But what I mean by processing emails is that you don't let any single email dictate what you're going to do for the next half an hour or an hour. You scan through the new emails that have come in, you delete the ones you don't need to work on. The ones that you can reply really quickly, 1 to 2 minutes, you can do some of those. And then the rest that are important needs to connect back to the topic area they connect to, a project, an objective, a KPI, and it gets put with that as part of your planning process. And then you start doing the work on that when you are allocating the time to work on that particular project, that particular task, that particular goal or objective, rather than just randomly responding to emails. That's a reactive approach. Okay. Now, the other thing here that can just help you with the simple timing of how much it takes to process email is the email rules. And in a simple example, one of the best ones is to take all of the emails that you're CC'd on. And then what I hear from people in organizations is there's just this growing amount of email that they get where they're in some sort of a group or they're CC'd for your information. And have a rule that takes that automatically out of the inbox and puts it into another folder or other folders. Okay. That significantly reduces the amount of emails that are in your inbox. Okay. Now, setting that rule, once you understand rules, is pretty easy and saves you time, provided you've got the right communication that goes with that. Okay. So it's an important part, because if you set up this rule and don't tell anyone, it's probably going to frustrate some people. Because most organizations, by default, expect responses to emails, even if you're CC'd, because that's the way communication happens, or a message, a Teams message or something like that as well. So you do need to set up the communication for other people to understand that you've set up some rules like this one, and they know that if you're CC'd, that's going to go to a separate folder that you'll either read when you get some free time, which is almost never, or you'll only refer to that, going to that if something else highly important or urgent comes up. Okay. So that's an important part about making sure that others understand that some emails that they send are not going to be read and understood and responded to. And anything that's really important, you've got to communicate in a different way, either sending it directly to you or not using email in the first place, which is also part of how we can look at improving communication efficiency here. Okay, because sometimes with things that are actually important, email isn't the best tool to use. Yeah. Is there a hint of agreement in that chuckle there, Rodney?
Oh, look, I find email a lot of people use for as a butt covering exercise to say I told someone, more than going and talking to the individual person saying, hey, here's what we need to look at, to do or whatever, and having a personal conversation. So I find you get more done with a personal conversation with an email that can be misread, misinterpreted, and you can't judge if the other person's received the information correctly and is going to act on it accordingly. That's I found being older, being more personal, I think is a better approach.
Yes, and in terms, I agree, and I can also say in terms of the research and my personal experience, it does work better from a leadership effectiveness and also how much time. It actually saves time usually to have those conversations rather than have huge amounts of emails going out there. Yeah.
And the other part of it is you can always follow up with an email, hey, we discussed this and agreed to do X, Y, Z.
Yes.
And there's your covering bit. It's clear. We've agreed to this here. They can come back and say, oh, hang on, I didn't quite interpret it that way. I thought you meant this.
Yes.
So it's a clear know of understanding, hey, we've both understood what we've agreed to do, and away we go and get it done.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also it sort of it gets people to think about, like, if they're trying to CC 20 people, but they don't want to have a conversation with 20 people, it helps to identify, how important this communication is and why am I sending it to them if I really don't want to spend the time talking to them about it. And sometimes that might be okay for background information, but it's clearly understood that it's you as a manager aren't going to read all of those emails. The reality is we don't read them anyway right now. We just don't have enough time. So it's just making it clearer. All right. So now let's look at capacity and how we go about managing our time. And what I've found is that people actually have somewhat given up on trying to have some sort of planning approach to their work. They have bigger term goals, right? What tends to happen these days is that it's left at that big picture, and then they get busy day to day, and often the day to day doesn't seem to connect to the bigger picture goals. So what I'm suggesting you think about is a system where you make sure consistently connecting things to your bigger picture goals. These days it's probably, maybe 2 years out, whatever it is. Different organizations, different industries have different picture. Bigger construction, mining, be longer. Other organizations, retail, might only be 1 year or so, depending on how quickly things change. But then you break that down to quarterly, 6 monthly, break it down into 120 days, down to 30 days. And so you know what the stepping stones are, and you're regularly talking about those. And then that becomes part of your weekly planning. Okay. And then weekly planning is the key way to be more effective, and you can save yourself a significant amount of time. To-do lists don't work consistently. Okay. Any thoughts on why I suggest that to-do lists don't work to help you be highly effective and save hours as a manager?
I think to-do lists are great for the day-to-day things, to jog your memory. I've got to get this done by the end of the day, but it's not a long-term strategy for defining what you're going to do to meet your main KPI targets and that.
Yes, and so that's one of the key things. Thanks, Rodney. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think you've kind of covered some things there in terms of we try to plan around 90-day cycles, and therefore we use rocks and OKRs and things like that to talk about what are the key things that we want to be working towards. Ideally, the bulk of the time is about moving those things forward, but there'll be other things that just need to be covered as well, like making sure there's office supplies and stuff like that, which isn't necessarily a KPI. So I think it's a blend of keeping that focus in regular meetings on the strategic elements that'll move the dial, but still taking care of the day-to-day that should hopefully be the little rocks as opposed to the big rocks.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And yet, most people describe to me that they don't do weekly plans. They don't regularly check in to see what they're doing in any given day connects to their bigger picture objectives. Lots of people write to-do lists. So what they tell me is that very quickly their to-do list becomes long, because they have a to-do list, they write it down or they put it electronically, and they just keep adding things to it. They tick some things off, but what they often say to me is that they add more during a day than they tick off. And so when your to-do list starts to get quite long, for most people, that creates a sense of stress or even overwhelm. And the other aspect of it is that it's just this long list with no sense of how does it connect to the objectives, that also when am I going to do this and how long might it take, or how do I break it down to to allocate the time that's required. And so that's why I suggest that the weekly planning in blocks of time, in a way that works for you. It still can be very flexible. We're not trying to put it in concrete. That's how you're going to be much more effective than just doing to-do lists. If you may have a to-do list for a given day where you just write up to 5 things, and you can sort of work out that kind of works pretty well. Weekly planning is the most effective way, and it gives you a sense of understanding what you're trying to get done in a week. Because I run this activity in the workshops that I do, and when I get people to take their to-do list and then plan how they might do that in a week, what we usually find is that they have 3 to 4 weeks worth of work on their to-do list, and yet somehow in their head they're expecting that they'll get it all done in a week, kind of. So doing it this way gives you a real sense of what your capacity is. What can you actually fit in realistically in a week? Okay. And I also, from a balance point of view, encourage you to think about everything that's going on in your life and helps you put in some boundaries, and things that are important in your life, like time with family, dropping off kids, doing some exercise. Put those kind of things in as well, and that will help you to create some balance if that's what you want. Okay. Now, these days, one of the things to change in our mindset is that there's always heaps to be done. And so what's really important in being effective is that we choose what to do. Also, equally, maybe even more importantly, we choose what not to do. Right? And we're clear about that ourselves, and we're clear about communicating it, rather than just hoping that we might get to it at some point in time. Okay? And when people put this in place, they feel like they're much more in control and have a greater sense of their capacity in achieving things more effectively. So have a think about that, and putting in place, if you have not already using it, a form of a weekly planning process. All right, so let's have a look also what's happening in terms of leadership effectiveness and what many managers are doing, and see if this connects with you or any of the other people that you might know in your organization or other organizations. But so many people tell me one of the first things that happens when things are a bit harder, a bit more complex, that are a bit behind, is that the managers will say, it's easier to do it myself. When I do it, I know it'll be done right. Okay. Unfortunately, this means that you're taking on more yourself, and you're also setting up your team to be an average performing team. Here are some other things that happen. Managers, and I was just with clients earlier this week talking about that she was stepping in, fixing situations, taking over the work of one of her team members that's underperforming. It's a common situation. She feels like she's doing the right thing. Another one is where your managers are giving the team members quick, direct, detailed answers to all of the questions, or specifically detailing out every single step that people need to do to complete their tasks. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that sounds all like the right thing to do. And what I'm saying is, actually, no, we need to stop doing these as managers if we're going to be really effective. They seem logical. They seem like what we should be doing as managers, but it's actually the wrong approach, and it leads to more of this stress and burnout and overwhelm. So what do we need to do differently? We need to be able to get things done through others, which means we want them to be engaged. We want them to be able to take responsibility and think for themselves, okay? And the behaviors we were talking about from the last couple of slides actually stop people taking responsibility and thinking for themselves. And that eventually ends up in less engagement. So the first thing we want to do is build a foundation of trust, two-way trust, okay, as leaders. And start thinking about every little behavior that you're doing. Is it building trust or is it breaking trust? Right? And there's so many small behaviors that managers are doing that break trust, and they don't realize it. Okay. So that's an important element of what we need to be thinking about. Then when you've got some level of trust, and the higher more solid that foundation, the more the empowerment works really well. So you're trusting your team members and giving them the opportunity to do things that they enjoy, that's a step up for them, that's part of their growth and development. And you need to stop doing the fixing and telling them and saving them and stopping the failures or the poor performance, as hard as it might be. And for my client this week, it was kind of like, well, I don't want this particular work going through my team to others, or others seeing that it's not done at my standard. So it is very hard to stop doing some of these things. It's the only way that people are going to truly learn and engage and grow and become higher performers themselves. And that leads into creating a succession plan where you're developing people to be able to step up and be able to do all of the things that you're doing and other senior people are doing in the organization. Okay. And using it, not having to recreate the wheels. It's not about having to do it trial and error and yourself. You can do that, but that takes a lot of time and effort. It's much better off using what's already been proven by hundreds and thousands of other people in management and leadership positions, and using those tools that work. And when you do this, you're going to get team members that are engaged, that are proactive, that will step up and when required, and it lets you step out of being involved so much in everything that's going on. You get a higher performing team. Right? You're able to be more effective as a leader, which actually reduces the number of hours that you're working. And this is the way that you can go up the ladder from your career and not have to continually just add more and more hours because of the way you operate and getting things done, trusting and empowering others. So let's just go back to all of that. Any thoughts or questions on those points?
I think the biggest problem I see around it is a lot of people want to, I do the micromanaging thing, they're not happy with something's being done. I think the best thing is giving clear expectation of what's needed to get from A to B, but whatever the person's journey they need to take to get there is up to them. And it's helping them grow along the journey as well. Yes, everyone's going to make mistakes. A manager, you're going to make mistakes. And my sort of philosophy in life is I believe that everyone can do everything. Mm-hmm. It helps stop pigeonhole people that, oh, look, that person there can only do this type of work. But if you believe everyone can do everything, all of a sudden you can give them that little bit extra and they can take that on. They actually do take it on and actually thankful for it because you teach them to learn and grow as well.
Yep.
And if you don't build up their database of knowledge, you become the database and you become the person that's the sole point of weakness in the whole business.
Yes, exactly right. Yep. The challenge for most people is implementing that. So most people agree with what they're saying, and then when it comes to the situation where it's the team member isn't performing the way that they would like them to, it becomes hard for them just to still continue that trust and allow them to build up at their pace or go about that journey in their way. So that's the challenge for most managers. But eventually some get there. Eventually, some sort of plateau with their career as to where they get to. And this will make a significant difference to team performance and also the amount of hours that you work.
I remember one of the roles I had, and I turned up at this place, and the person I was taking over from proceeded to tell me about every single person, how bad they were in the team. And I went, oh, okay, fine. And I just left it at that and didn't sort of take much of it in, because I don't believe in looking at people in that way. And this one particular person, they said they couldn't manage anything, they couldn't get anything done right. And it's the most effective person I found on the team when you gave them actually go and let them actually have a chance at failing and learning, and I actually put her forward when I left there as my replacement.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because that's how much she could actually, she understood the business. She was just never given an opportunity to have a go.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm.
That's a great example. And it's
Mm.
probably when she was not given an opportunity, it's kind of like, her motivation's down, so she's just cruising along.
Yeah.
And then when you give her the opportunity, give someone an opportunity, they step up. And when people try this out, like you've done yourself, like I
Mm.
help my clients, there's a bit of a learning curve, but it works well so often, and people are really happy, often somewhat surprised
Mm.
about just like your story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Any other questions on these things? All right. We'll keep moving on. The key thing here, connecting back to the earlier point about having lots of tools or information, most managers, when you point these things out, will say, yeah, yep, that looks right. That's what I should be doing. What happens, though, when we get into understanding what's actually going on for them on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, they're not doing these things, or they're not doing the small steps that lead to these things. Okay. So, for example, they will say, yep, I want to empower my team members and build trust. But then a project is getting a bit behind that they've given someone the opportunity to do. They're a bit worried that it's not going to get done on time to the right standard. So as it gets close to the deadline, they say, look, Michael, I'll just fix this to make sure that we get it done on time, and then we'll all look really good. And we've done a good job with this particular project, and we'll hit the deadline. I don't want you to have to stress about it. Okay. And they think they're doing the right thing. But are they? How does the team member feel who's just had that piece of work taken off them?
Mm.
Don't feel like they're trusted as much. They feel like they're not sure whether the boss thinks they're really capable, or a whole bunch of things go through our heads. So there's lots of small and medium things that managers can be doing that's actually breaking each of these elements, breaking trust, disempowering people. So that's where most find it the difficult and the day-to-day stuff. How often are they really building what we're talking about here? All right. So let's keep moving forward. You two both sound like you've implemented a lot of things. So I'll just go through this quickly, but it's for others that are maybe having a few more challenges. What if you keep going the way that you have been going? Where does that lead to? Is it worry about burnout, or feeling like you're operating in a similar way? Even for yourselves, would you feel happy in 2 or 3 years if you were still saying that you're about a 6 out of 10 in terms of your performance? So the other way to change this is to fast track leadership, and that's to enable you to have a consistently high confidence, that 8 to 10 out of 10 performance with a high performing team that's highly engaged, and options moving forward in your career. Here's an example of, I'll just give you a couple of examples. I won't go through them. I'll let you read what these clients have said, just a couple of examples. And then we'll check in a moment for final questions and wrap up. One more. And this is an example of Judith's extremely intelligent, highly educated person. So it's a good example of, it's not about intelligence or education. There's some specific things for leadership that can help to make you much more effective. So wrap up on some questions towards the end here. Any questions about your own situations or about anything that I've covered that you'd like me just to make clearer or go over again?
Sorry, Michael, I'm a little bit distracted. I've got a client nudging me about performance of someone that reports to me. So it's yeah, one of those cases where it's a constant juggle. I guess probably one question is we've used, I guess, reasonably subjective assessments of where we're at. Do you subscribe to or have any tools that enable a bit more of an objective assessment on where people are at?
Yes. I think it's absolutely valuable to do a personal reflection and assessment, and you can work from that. I also encourage at times 360-degree feedback, and I use the particular tool from the Centre for Creative Leadership, a global not-for-profit organisation. And then at times there's other elements, like you can do a 360 emotional intelligence assessment as well. If emotional intelligence leadership assessment, you can also do profile, DISC, MBTI, and a DISC you can get a leadership part of a leadership profile with that as well. So just depending on what you're looking for, there's certainly value in adding some of those things in. I'm very flexible with looking at that. So it all depends on, have you done 360s before? Do you do something else where you get regular feedback? If you've already, and organizations do this, so if you've done a few, you don't need to do another one just to start another part of your development. On the other hand, if you're looking for something to help you give more information, then one or a combination of those sort of tools is useful.
Cool. Yeah, I've played around a bit with DISC and MBTI and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think for me, it's useful doing that with teams or peers, and it's probably less the result of the assessment and more the conversation that occurs through the process and shared understanding that's valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Agree totally with that. Yep. Cool. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Well, here's my contact details. If any other questions come up, please feel free to contact me. If you'd like to have a chat about how my program works, my core program at the moment is about helping especially new managers or managers that haven't had the opportunity to do lots of training or coaching. And I put it into a package that gives you support and a program over 12 months that only costs about the same as 2 to 3 days worth of training, and you get that ongoing support, including weekly coaching. And I've specifically packaged that up because I've found that newish leaders or leaders that haven't had an opportunity to get training often miss out on ongoing support with their training and development because of the cost or the structure of their organizations. So that's the sweet spot that I'm trying to look at the moment, and that connects back with my purpose at the start, helping as many people as I can to be better leaders, and through better leaders, helping to create a more positive, better society. So yeah, feel free to shoot me an email or book in a chat if there's anything further that you'd like to know about, or just to shoot me an email saying send me some more information. I can do that as well.
Excellent. Look, really appreciate the time, Michael. Thank you for taking us through that. Certainly some things to think about, and I'll reach out if there's anything we'd like to do further.
Thank you for that.
Great. Okay, thanks, Michael. Really appreciate your time as well.
Thanks, Rodney. Appreciate you both being here. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. Bye.
Yeah.